a mother and her daughter visit a shrine on their way for the girl to be married off, bandits rob them and take a valuable necklace from the mother. The young girl warns them that the Blessed Virgin will punish them. As a bird flies nearby to prove that the Virgin heard the girl, the bandit looks up just in time for the bird to poop in his eye. After having a laugh at the gall of the girl, the bandits give back the necklace and allow them to pass. Once in the city, the mother and daughter head straight to the church that is waiting for them. It turns out that this young girl is the one named Benedetta. Signor Carlini is brought back with Sister Felicita to discuss the dowry and thank him for bringing another bride for Christ. Carlini explains that times have been hard, but Felicita has heard plenty of sob stories. The two of them haggle like they're trading livestock. Then when he goes to shake her hand, she even says that they aren't horse trading. You were just haggling over a mere 25 scooty. Who's haggling who? All this time, I never realized that you actually had to pay to become a nun. I thought you just volunteered. You have to pay to be that close to Jesus. I mean, she calls him a haggling Jew when he wouldn't meet her price. After an agreement is settled upon, Benedetta is brought back to change into her new clothes. While she's with another sister, she's warned that her intelligence might get her into more trouble than it's worth, and she's brought to her sleeping cell. That night, Benedetta has trouble sleeping, and she decides to wander the convent. She heads straight for the Blessed Virgin statue and she prays to Mary. While she prays, she tells Mary about how alone she is and whether or not she can even hear her prayers now. I think it's safe to say she hears you. Just to make it weirder, she starts sucking on Mary like she's breastfeeding. I knew there'd be some weird stuff going on in this one. French films are amazing, but there's something raw about them too. When the other sisters come out to lift the statue off of her, all of them are calling it a miracle that she wasn't crushed. But Felicita will have no talk of miracles. She says that they're usually more trouble than they're worth. Flash forward 18 years, and we see a play of how Mary died and reunited with Jesus. Of course, Benedetta plays Mary, and she has a vision of Jesus visiting her in a field. Benedetta runs to him as her real body is lifted up to Jesus on the stage. After the play, everyone gathers for a feast that has been donated by Carlini, and Benedetta's mother asks her why her feet were moving during the play. Benedetta tells her that she was visited by Jesus, but her mother brushes it off as a nice gesture. As the family prepares to depart, a banging can be heard at the gate, and after a nun opens it, a gangly woman named Bartolomea busts in and begs for the convent to give her shelter from her abusive father. After Benedetta pleads for her parents to help, Carlini finally agrees to pay the dowry for Bartolomea to join the convent. And let me just say, Felicita is damn good at her job of convincing people to pay for their spot in heaven. The second she senses that he's even considering it, she hops right on that train and rides it all the way to the bank. That evening, Benedetta helps Bartolomea, and Bartolomea is definitely a little rough around the edges when it comes to social standards. As the two girls go to the bathroom together, and I'm talking about a hardcore number 2, it sounded like a tsunami was coming after it hit the bottom. Bartolomea talks about how she was used sexually back home. Soon, Felicita's daughter, Christina, comes in and interrupts their private bathroom break. Once the two girls make it back to the sleeping cells, Bartolomea kisses Benedetta before going back to her bed, and Benedetta immediately prays to Mary about someone else teaching her instead. The next day, Bartolomea tries to stay close to Benedetta, and I mean really close. So close that she sticks a finger up her bum in the middle of morning choir. It was just as much a surprise to me as it was for her. To top that off, she gets a vision of being attacked by snakes. And if you ever wanted to see Jesus slicing through snakes with a sword, this is your chance to see it. It was pretty epic. Jesus tells her that no beast can come between them, and she kisses Jesus before he goes away again. When she comes to, she finds that she's actually speaking these words in front of the rest of the convent. Later at confessions, Benedetta tells him that she's seen Jesus, but he assures her that the only way to see him is through suffering. Later, Benedetta makes Bartolomea retrieve bobbins from a boiling pot of water, and this seems to change their dynamic. When Felicita brings Benedetta to her office, she picks up that she might have affections for Bartolomea, and she gives her a mild punishment. As Benedetta carries out her new duties, she hears from one of the sisters that God's love comes in many different forms, and she reveals some sort of parasite on her breast that has eaten away a good part of it. This completely threw me off. When she whipped it out and I saw whatever that was, I had to rewind it a bit. Then we jumped straight to Benedetta screaming in pain in bed, and after the doctor comes to take a urine sample, she shows that there is black bile in it and says that's completely common. In what world is black bile in urine common? Do I need to reevaluate how I check these things? Later, Benedetta is still tied to her bed, and Bartolomea visits her to let her know that she wants her. That night in her dream, Benedetta gets shot in the hand with an arrow from bandits, and they hold her down to have their way with her. Have no, dear child. Jesus shows up looking like Assassin's Creed and cuts them to pieces. I don't know what's going on anymore. This is just a bad trip. It turns out that it's a fake Jesus. Maybe. In the morning, Felicita tells Benedetta that she's placing someone as her roommate to care for her, and we find out that Bartolomea is the only one to volunteer for the job. As Bartolomea makes herself at home, Benedetta starts to warm up to the idea of having her around. That night, a man calls out to Benedetta, and she wakes up to find Jesus being crucified. He tells her to strip down and come to him. He then has her remove his garments, and he apparently got tucked in before getting put on the cross. It was like Silence of the Lambs again. When Bartolomea finds Benedetta on the ground, she finds her with holes in her hands, feet, and side. When Benedetta is presented to the sisters, they immediately kneel and claim it to be the stigmata. Felicita has her brought to her chambers to be examined by a doctor and a man from the church. Everyone believes that this could be stigmata, except for Felicita. After sending Benedetta away, they find her at the feet of the Mary statue, and she calls out to them in a satanic voice that is supposed to be Jesus speaking through her. The provost believes that this is absolutely a miracle, but Felicita and Christina are doubtful. That night, Jesus visits Benedetta again and asks for her heart. I think it's time to set some restrictions here. This is absolutely an invasion of personal space. At the next gathering, the provost decides to announce that he's gonna make Benedetta the abbess of the convent now. Christina stands to speak her own mind, but Felicita calls for her to resist. When he asks Felicita to relinquish her responsibilities, Felicita calls Benedetta to the front and transfers her rosary to her. Afterwards, Benedetta moves into her new room with Bartolomea, but they're interrupted when a medical emergency happens elsewhere. Sister Felicita and Christina volunteer to stay with the nun, and they speak about the blasphemy that could be potentially going on. Felicita reminds Christina that everyone that should know does know, but the fact that they aren't doing anything proves that they don't want to. She should just keep her mouth shut or they'll destroy her too. As the bells for Vesper ring, Felicita leaves to attend, and Christina stays behind to watch as the nun dies in her arms. Later, Christina heads to confession to lie about seeing Benedetta forge her stigmata. Don't you love how the biggest scandals seem to happen in old convent movies? We jump straight from this to Benedetta and Bartolomea getting a little frisky in their new quarters. This entire movie is one big scandal. Bartolomea takes her to bed, and you already know that there's no way they're gonna get away with this. I mean, they go at each other. There's no slow warm-up or anything. This is it. Later, the sisters gather for their meal, and Christina is called forward to speak her mind. She gets in front of everyone and tells them that Benedetta is a false prophet. Her own mother, Felicita, stands in front of the convent and denies her claims, though. Benedetta speaks in her satanic voice again and calls for Christina to be whipped by her own hand. When Benedetta makes it back to her room later, she finds that Bartolomea has whittled her Mother Mary statue down to a dildo on one end. Splinters! Just stick with the fingers for now. Those are splinters. Oh, someone is also spying on them through a peephole. Told you they wouldn't get away with it. Suddenly, the sky outside turns red as a comet soars across the sky. Everyone gathers outside to witness this, but soon they see Christina walking on the roof. She jumps as Felicita calls out to her, but she's not dead yet. Benedetta comes over to caress her head, and Christina dies. When Benedetta tries to intercede to save Christina's suicidal soul, Felicita keeps her from laying hands on her and calls her a lying whore. After Christina's body is taken to be washed, Felicita sneaks away on a carriage, but Benedetta finds out immediately. She finds out that Felicita is headed to Florence to speak to the higher-ups, and she heads back to her chambers to tell Bartolomea the news. It also becomes even more unclear on whether Benedetta actually cut herself or if the miracles really did happen. I I was pretty sure at one point that she really did think she saw these things while she was in a trance, but now I'm not so sure. Benedetta definitely seems more conniving now. Speaking of conniving, Benedetta acts as though she's being spoken to by God, and she tells Bartolomea that the sisters must dig a grave. The next day, Felicita makes it to Florence to find the city overrun by the plague. She speaks to her higher-up, and he assures her that he'll find out if there is blasphemy and devilry in her convent. Back at the convent that night, the comet still hovers over the convent, and the provost addresses the city by saying that the plague is coming to them. As he kneels to pray, Benedetta comes forward and speaks to Jesus. She tells them all not to fear and that the comet is actually a sign that the Lord is looking over them, and the plague will pass by their city. She then turns to the city guards and commands them to shut the city gates to keep the plague out. Suddenly, she collapses. When the nuncio and Felicita arrive in the city, they find out that the city has been placed on lockdown. Soon the provost comes out to explain everything, and he tells the nuncio that Benedetta actually died earlier that afternoon. No, she can't be dead. There's gotta be more creepy Jesus visions with a sword. Sure enough, when the nuncio goes to give her her last rites, Benedetta shoots up out of her coffin and says that they'll all live so long as she lives. Oh, and Jesus himself sent her back. Soon, Benedetta's trial begins, and Nuncio starts off with the accusations of lesbian sex. Bartolomea keeps her mouth shut and denies everything, but eventually, Nuncio brings her to a torturer down in the basement. She is stripped and tied to a table where the Nuncio asks her for her confession again. She still denies having done anything like that with Benedetta, and they bring out a device that looks like it should be in a BDSM sex shop. It goes inside the woman and expands to horrifying sizes, like an umbrella. Later, the Nuncio calls Benedetta to his chamber, and he asks what love is to her. She sticks to her lie of only wanting to be with Jesus, and while she washes his feet, she finds a tick that has been sucking on his calf. The plague is here. It's always the ticks. Soon Bartolomea is brought back inside, and she quickly gives them the confession they've been waiting for. She shows them where the wooden dildo is kept, and Benedetta is taken to a private room. Meanwhile, we have confirmation that Felicita is in fact infected with the plague. Soon Bartolomea is rejected and sent out from the convent, and the nuncio heads to his quarters to sign the sentencing of Benedetta. He also finds out that he is infected with the plague too. Benedetta is allowed one more meeting with Felicita to pray, and Felicita explains that she is jealous of how God speaks to Benedetta. Later, Benedetta is brought out to the town square where Bartolomea asks for forgiveness, but Benedetta assures her that she had to be betrayed like Jesus was. In a last attempt to make things clean, the nuncio tries to convince her to confess to everything in front of everyone that already wants her set free. Of course, Benedetta takes this chance in the spotlight to turn the tide of this morality battle, and she has one of the other nuns escort Felicita to the square where she reveals the plague and blames the nuncio for it. I can't tell which side I'm rooting for, and I still don't know for sure that Benedetta is faking all of it, at least not intentionally. The nuncio quickly orders for Benedetta to be burned at the stake, but Bartolomea rallies the crowd to blame the nuncio instead of Benedetta. The fire is accidentally lit at the stake, but the crowd breaks through the guards and takes over the plaza. While the nuncio makes his retreat, Felicita kisses him and the crowd grabs him within seconds. Bartolomea helps free Benedetta, but she's so compelled to play her role that she prays over the nuncio after he gets stabbed by one of the crowd. As he dies, Bartolomea pulls Benedetta from the commotion, and they watch as Felicita burns herself at the stake. Later, the two women wake up in a barn in the countryside naked, and Benedetta tells her that she has to go back to the city. When Bartolomea tells her that there's nothing left for her there, Benedetta is not swayed, and she tries to explain that she hasn't been lying this whole time. I feel like Benedetta doesn't even know what the truth is anymore. She tells Bartolomea that they'll burn her at the stake, but God won't let the flames touch her. She legitimately thinks that God is protecting her from everything. Benedetta leaves Bartolomea in the barn as she makes her way back to the town. It turns out that she was not permitted martyrdom, and she lived in the convent until she was 70. What's even crazier is aside from the nuncio and Felicita, the plague skipped over the town they were in. And the credits roll.